Hello, everybody. Welcome to Mystic Chat. This will be the 8th installment of Mystic Chat. And unless you live under a rock, we are all aware of what's happening. The world is changing finally, and we're very happy to be part of that change. We are trying to be happy to be part of that change. We're going to talk about Black Lives Matter and magic and that intersection of being a magical being and making the change. Talking the talk and walking the walk. So thank you, Chris, for lending me the micro to introduce the show tonight. And to tell you about me a little bit, I'm Mexican. I'm a Mexican from Mexico. I'm an immigrant. I'm a minority, obviously. And also I'm a witch. I'm a pagan. I'm a priestess. I'm a communicator, among other things. And I am very honored and happy to be sharing the space today with all my panel mates and obviously our special guest, Song. But I also would like to introduce you to Luke, who works on Nordic paganism and does all this wonderful divination and is also part of the fraternity
Fellowship.
fellowship. I never remember the Fellowship of the Phoenix. So let me stop saying silly things. Luke, how are you? Please introduce yourself.
Hi, Laura. Yeah, I'm Luke. Like Laura said, I am a hard polytheist, a skeptical spirit worker. I work a lot with the Norse and Hellenic pantheons, as well as the queer spirits of the Fellowship of the Phoenix. Things that are important that I'm bringing to the space today. I'm real white. I'm real white, and I'm operating from that like space. I also am queer and trans. Those are things that I'm bringing to this. And I am going to introduce somebody who needs no introduction, Chris Alon.
Hi, so my name is Chris. I am a messenger for the Fellowship of the Phoenix and a three-time, about to be four-time published author, a pagan practitioner. But today, we have a very, very special guest. Her name is Song Marshall, and she's one of those people who he is a very bright spirit in the world, and we wanted her on the show today just to share some experiences and things like that. So I don't want to take any more time. Song, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experiences and things?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Song Marshall. I am an actress in Chicago. I'm originally from Los Angeles. I moved to Chicago almost 11 years ago now when I got out of college for acting reasons. And I do so many things. My pantheon is kind of all over the place. My first interactions were actually with the Nordic pantheon, Thor in particular, which of course I was like, really, Thor? That's what we're going with right now? Really? Okay, cool. I do also work with some African deities as well as a few Greek as well. But Thor and Oshun are the deities that I work with the most, as well as Johnny Gloss in fairy tradition. And yeah, I kind of do a lot of work all over the place. I'm first and foremost an artist. I'm an entertainer. I'm an actress, a singer, and a storyteller. And that's kind of where my passion and I guess my magic goes into. Yeah. So that's kind of like an overview for me.
You know, the motivation behind the show for today, we've been doing this Mystic Chat, and I say we, I've been part of a few of them. I was very, very lucky and pleased and fortunate to be included. Thank you, Chris, for including me as part of the team. And the motivation to do the show today is to speak about racism and to speak about the liberation of our people, the people of color, and about Black Lives Matter, and how witches in general, pagan witches or feminist witches, which I am, I'm a feminist witch. We cannot, in my opinion, and I guess my fellow panel mates agree, we cannot talk the talk about liberation and equality and diversity and plurality. And as allies, we try to do a panel and talk about Black Lives Matter, and it will be ludicrous to have it without a person of color and a Black person that could talk about their own experience within the magical community. And as well intended as we could be, it wouldn't be right. Even I, as a brown person, you know, I think I can understand, but I don't, because I'm not a Black American. So we, I don't know what you will be willing to talk about, you know, because that's the other thing. It's like, it is a conversation that needs to happen amongst white people, but we don't want to take the voice from the people that need to speak right now. So in that token, I mean, I kind of like, we all want to roll with you into what your experiences have been, I don't know, in the pagan community in general, practicing your magic. What's your opinion on appropriation? What's your opinion on doing magic for
Girl.
Many, many things. And with that, I think our job as allies is to shut up and let you talk.
Okay. Appropriation. Well, okay. First of all, I guess I should start just so that everyone has the sort of context of where I'm coming from. I'm originally from Los Angeles. My father was LAPD for 14 years, from mid 80s to mid 90s. And if you know anything about what happened in the mid 90s, I think he was a police officer up until about 1993. And there are many members of my family who were police officers, some after being in the military for many years, some who worked in the LAPD, like LA court systems. They were, my aunt was a sheriff there for I think 35 years or something. So that's kind of what I grew up with, right? And honestly, initially, my views from the outside of like sort of watching activism, watching my father do activism as a police officer was sort of skewed because I saw what happened to him when that happened, when he decided to do that. And that was a choice that he made. And I appreciate that he made it, but it did have lasting repercussions on our family. He's alive. I do want to say that he's alive. And I thank the gods every day for that. But there was a cost to that. And he obviously is no longer a police officer. And there were very, I don't want to necessarily say nefarious, but there were very awful things that happened to him and to our family because of his choice to speak out about corruption within the police force and the inherent racism that lies there. So when there is that conversation about like the police and what they go through and how they fear for their lives and this, that, and the other, it's like, I get it. I've heard those stories from my family members, but I've also heard them speak about them in ways where you don't have to escalate the situation, because that's your job, is to not escalate the situation, right? And to keep everyone safe. So I do want to put that out there, that I'm not necessarily coming from a place of, I hate all cops are bad. I understand that they're not. However, there aren't enough of them that are using their place and their privilege to actually protect the people or to even speak out against their coworkers who are doing the things that they're doing. It's a very interesting system of brainwashing, honestly, that happens when you take that position. And I know many police officers. I have friends that are police officers, and I have friends that have tried to become police officers and weren't allowed to because they wouldn't cow to certain rules.
Mhm.
So I do have a bit more understanding of that than you might expect, I guess.
Mhm.
This light is really bright. Sorry.
Yes, but you know what? I was gonna tell you about the light, but it's giving you kind of like a warrior makeup in your face. So I'm like, I don't know if this is intended or not. And you being an actress, I'm like, maybe
No.
she wanted that way. I don't know. But
No, it's just, this was the best spot. I figured so that I wouldn't have my camera jiggling on my lap, and it's right in front of a window, and this is the spot where this time of day it's just really hot. So
see,
sorry if I get
somebody
blasted
in the
out.
chat is saying tiger stripes, and it's pretty cool. I agree. I for one, being a Mexican, I don't, you know, this is, I know, I don't want to, I don't mean to unpack or take time
Oh
away.
no, you're fine.
But as a Mexican, you know, I like to be called Mexican. I don't like to be called brown person. I don't like to be called Latinx or Latino or Hispanic or Spanish. I think those are very ignorant terms. And I really thank you, Song. I know we met before, but this is the first time we're actually having a conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that anecdote about your dad being a cop, and because a lot of people are having trouble with, in my opinion, what I've seen on my friends on Facebook, a lot of people are having trouble juggling two facts that are as real and as valid into their mind. You know, they think they have to be opposite facts, and no, we're humans. We have the capacity to hold two opposite facts as true in our mind.
Mhm.
And I understand not necessarily what protesters are doing, but why are they doing it? And I think that is really important that we all understand that it's not about the rioting and it's not about the so-called looting, because you and I can do a whole show just in looting, right?
Yeah.
But but to understand and to make peace with the fact that I love Chicago. This is a city that embraced me 20 years ago, and I love to live in Chicago. And I hurt when property is damaged, but I understand why property has to be damaged. And you telling us your story about your long line of family members being part of cops or law enforcement, and how it's hard to hold two opposite thoughts at the same time, but it's valid and it's positive, you know.
I always like to joke, the rest of my family all have guns in their professions, and I hold a microphone.
The all sword is mightier than the pen is mightier than the sword, indeed.
Yeah. I have no interest. I never, there was a short time that I had an interest in the military, only because, you know, family, and poor and wanting to go to college. I was like, maybe I'll join the military. And actually my father told me not to. He like, I was talking about it with him, and he was like, wait, are you actually serious? And I said, yeah. And he's like, please don't do that. Don't go into the military.
Yeah,
So I didn't.
my stepdaughter flirted with the idea for a little bit, and her family were all like, no, you don't need to do that. So a lot of the people that I've heard on my Facebook, and I don't know, Luke and Chris, if this has been your experience as well, but when the pandemic, COVID-19, coronavirus started and all of that, we had a lot of this, I guess, primal reaction from people that, oh yeah, we get in this because the goddess is punishing us because we have been damaging the earth. And in my opinion, I've been telling people that is a very Christian way of seeing things. I don't think the goddess is up there, you know, keeping tabs and punishing us and rewarding us when we're good kids. what I have seen is we need a change. We've been calling for this change. We've been calling for evolution of humanity for a long, long time. And seeing the president as the devil, I'm a tarot reader, so I see everything on tarot language. So the devil comes first to shine a light on the darkness and to bring out all the yucky, dirty, disgusting stuff that has been hidden, and mainly racism. And I have been telling people, racism has never gone away. Is you haven't seen it, but we the Black and brown folks have been telling you the racism is alive and well. Now you can see it because everything has a reason to exist, and Trump had a reason to exist to shine a light on racism in America. And the next card is the Tower, the destruction of the systems. And I thought Hollywood and the Me Too movement was the beginning of the Tower, and the systems that need to die, patriarchy, capitalism, and oppression, of course. And I thought, well, I guess COVID indirectly came to break the system. And now we have this uprising of the people of color. And I don't want to take, again, the words and the time from you, but magically, how do you see that implication of the changes? And as Daenerys Targaryen say, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, we have to break the wheel. The wheel is broken. You folks are breaking it. And I'm very honored to be a witness. How do you bring that to your magic, to your magical experience as a pagan, as a practitioner of magic?
That's a very interesting way of looking at it. I had never really looked at it that way before. I am not terribly experienced with tarot. I've read a bit of it. Obviously, it was my first foray into divination and whatnot. But I had since moved over to different systems. But for me, it's difficult to explain how exactly I incorporate that into my magic, because I feel like that is just how I do my magic as a Black person, as a Black witch, as a Black person who has magic. I can't really divorce that from my work. Mm-hmm. And I feel like any work that I do, obviously I'm wanting to help the community and help the world in general. So there's not a way for me to divorce that in my work. So to be able to put a name on how I do it specifically is very difficult for me. Just because Laura, I can't change my skin, right? Mm-hmm. I can change the way I look only so much. And because that is the first thing that people will experience of me or notice when they interact with me, because you cannot help but notice it. I'm sorry, being colorblind is bullshit. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you guys curse on the show?
Yeah, we do.
It's okay.
Cool. It's like, you can't be colorblind. Like, please see me. Please see that I am a Black person standing in front of you. Don't erase that. I don't want you to erase it. I just want you to not treat me differently because of it. Right. And that's something that I feel like, particularly in recent years, that we've been losing a lot of nuance, a lot of the gray area, right? Everything has to be this or it has to be that. We have to do things this way or we have to do it that way or else it's whatever. And it's really difficult to just pull out the pieces that you want and things still make sense. Just like how you were saying earlier about intersectionality. Intersectionality is a huge thing. I'm Black, I'm a woman, I'm queer, I am polytheistic. There are so, I don't know how many other minorities I can collect at this point. They're like Pokemon, I guess. But mm-hmm. But I'm very cisgendered, hun.
No, this was just me. This was just me.
Okay.
This was just me being yep.
Yeah.
I hear that.
But like, it's so when it comes to magic and when it comes to doing any sort of work, whether it's creative, or I guess my creativity is my magic at this point, it's just very hard for me to remove those parts because it is so intrinsically who I am. And in order for the world to be a better place for people like myself, those things have to change.
Yep.
And that those parts of the world that are racist and bigoted and sexist and ageist and ableist all have to change.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very interesting that all of this is coming to a head in June. Because also being a queer person, I do feel like there's also been a lot of lacking representation for Black queer people.
Yes.
And it's very interesting that that is a thing when Stonewall was a fucking riot.
Right.
Right? So it's very interesting to have these things all kind of coming to a head together in a time when it is Pride, when we are all like social distancing and having COVID and all of this. It's just a very interesting time to have all this coming together. And for me personally, it's been interesting because earlier this year, the last show I was in before everything kind of shut down, was about a Black family dealing with a friend of theirs having been killed by a police officer. And in that cast, there was 3 people in the main cast and 3 understudies, and I was one of the understudies. And out of 6 people, 3 of us had fathers who were police officers. And so it was really interesting doing that work together and being in that space and kind of unpacking a lot of things that we hadn't really thought about or discussed before, in a really real and tangible way, putting together this piece. And unfortunately, it had to be cut short because of COVID. But yeah, it's been a really interesting experience.
Yeah.
Night.
I hear. I'm sorry, Lou. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, especially since you talk about like this is just how my magic works. This is what magic is for, to a certain extent, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about, especially since like Thor and Oshun, being your main two, like, can you talk a little bit about that and how those two factor in?
Sure. So I've caveat, I do want to say I am not, I have not been initiated into any particular ATR or African traditional religious practice. So I cannot claim that. My interactions with Oshun and the way that I work with her is very different, and I understand that. But they have not made that avenue available to me, so I have not taken that route. So I did mention Thor was the first deity to actually kind of like speak to me and interact with me. And growing up, of course, I started with Greek mythology. Everyone starts with Greek mythology. And I became really interested in it. And then when I started reading a lot of the Nordic myths, for whatever reason, I just felt more drawn to that. Excuse me. And kind of read bits and pieces of it off and on over the years, and had dabbled with runes. I had bought my first rune set was adventuring stones that I got at some random metaphysical shop near my college. And I initially just felt that I had more of a connection with those than I ever did tarot cards. I think it also, just for me, it's because it is a bit more succinct. It's not as many things to handle and put together. It's a very direct form of communication, and I just seem to respond to that a bit better. So fast forward a few years, having gone through college, gotten out on my own, moved to Chicago, and no longer living with my very Christian Southern Baptist Pentecostal parents. I ran into Matthew Ellenwood, and while I was working, and through that and through doing work with Terra Mysterium, I found the pagan community here in Chicago. And I will admit, I was very naive. I thought pagans didn't exist. I thought it was a historical thing because I grew up in the church. So I was very surprised when I went to my first pagan pride, and my first, then it was the Brotherhood of the Phoenix, but now Fellowship of the Phoenix ritual. And just my mind was blown, and it was very surprising to me, the amount of things, like small rituals that I would do that I didn't think was magic and didn't think was a ritual, things that I had in my house that I've collected. I've collected fairies ever since I can remember. Like always having all these different like Celtic things around me that I was very drawn to. And never just think like, oh, I'm a nerd. I'm a fantasy person. Of course I like these things, right? And then it wasn't until I got into the pagan community that I realized like, oh, there's a reason for this. Okay, cool. So Thor was the first deity that reached out to me. I guess it was 2010. And the reason that my reaction was that was because if you know anything about nerd media, 2011 is when the first Thor Marvel movie came out, and there were posters up. And I remember talking to Keith because I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, really, Thor? Like, no one is going to believe me that it's not because I like Chris Hemsworth.
That's awesome.
And I was talking to the guys that run the Voodoo store at their booth at Pagan Pride, and I opened my big mouth and was like, oh, I'm really surprised that it would be Nordic deities that would reach out to me and not African ones or anything like that. And we started talking, yeah, that head tilt, exactly. So that night, I had a dream where I believe it was Shango that came to me first. And then I had an interaction with Baron Samedi that just showed up in my bedroom. That was fun. And then I start telling these things to Keith and Matthew, and they're like, You know the look they get.
Yeah, totally.
And so then I ended up doing mystery school with them and doing a bit more study, learning how to actually do practice in various different ways. And funnily enough, Oshun came to me as I was doing my Sabbath project, and I misinterpreted it as Yamaya, which is really funny because all of the things that I had screamed Oshun, screamed it. But for whatever reason in my brain, I was thinking it was Yamaya. And I'm saying like all of my reasoning behind everything, and Matthew just has that like, And we get done, and he's like, okay, you might want to look into Oshun. I was like, okay, cool. And so I go and I start reading about her, and I'm like, I am an idiot. Because her energy has been around me my whole life, and I didn't know it. You know, I didn't know anything about her because, of course, my upbringing, no one's ever going to talk about that. But there's a lot of practices that are ingrained in our culture that no longer has a magical significance as far as like why they do them. Like my great aunt would sometimes put orange essences in her mouth water. There was no reason. She just did it because it smelled pretty and she liked the way the house felt. But for her, it had no magical significance, finding out later that it's Florida water.
That's awesome.
Right? And I found out later that my grandmother would have very intense dreams. And I think that's kind of where things started for me, because I had a lot of night terrors growing up. And really, really intense nightmares, and dreams where, or I'd be in a situation and be able to say, oh, this person's going to walk through that door, and then behind them is going to be a person wearing an orange shirt with this stripe or something, and not really understand why. It's like, oh, deja vu. Oh, wait, I bet, okay, this person's going to have this hat that comes through, right? And they're like, oh, that's so weird. Like, I know, that's so weird. Not realizing that it was a magical thing. So I was a little bit, to get back to your point of your question, Luke, I was a little worried at first when I realized that the main ones kind of interacting with me were going to be Thor and Oshun. But they get on like a house on fire. Like, they are fine. They are perfectly fine. And I feel like because Thor has a lot of similarities to Shango, which in some of her myths is her husband. So it's just, yeah, it is what it is. I don't ask questions anymore. I just go with it.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's kind of interesting because Thor is a god of justice, and he's considered the god of the people. And how I was always trained in heathenism is that if you're going to do something secretive, you talk to Odin. If you were going to do something for the people, about the people, you talk to Thor. So I think it's fascinating that you have those two deities working together. Just because I'm curious, because I know when I do magic for like gay and queer and LGBTQ things, I never say for myself, I'm going to tackle this issue magically. I'm going to tackle that issue. It's whatever's on my plate, and or whatever just happens. So I'm wondering how you, like, what kind of magic do you do? Like, is it more like meditation, or do you do spell work, or do you talk to the gods? Like, what do you do for things like this?
So this is where trying to put into words is a little bit difficult for me, because I've found over the years that music is a very strong part of my practice. Music is very meditational for me. Like, just general, like, basic sitting and waiting and listening meditation, just I can't. It's it's so frustrating to me. I have gotten a little bit, I have gotten better, like, since the mystery school stuff, with being able to sit in silence, but just sitting still is so difficult for me. So music and dance is kind of how I can kind of tap into those things, because dance is such a spiritual act for me. And I wasn't really able to put that into a name for a very, very long time. But I just knew that, like, if I was very upset, if I was angry, if I was emotional about any particular thing, just crank up the music and just start dancing and, like, just let it out. And that's just how I've always kind of been able to kind of work through those energies for myself. So any sort of, I guess, magical work for me really kind of just starts with music, moving, dancing, getting into my body, and out of my head, because I overthink everything. So I have to get myself to a place where I'm not being cerebral about it, and just kind of let the process be what it is. And I mentioned earlier that my art is kind of my magic, and being creative is how I feel like I'm able to kind of focus energies to be able to do anything. It's honestly, it's how I stay sane. if we're calling me sane at this point. The pandemic really kind of messed with that for me, because all of my shows got canceled or postponed or what have you. And so finding a different avenue for me to be creative and to still tell stories and to still be able to interact with people was kind of my main way of getting through all of this. So for me, and at first I would always chuckle and laugh when I tell people this, and I still do, because I think the reason it started was hilarious, but I joined TikTok last September, and it was just I was just gonna watch, because I was part of a podcast group and I liked some of the stuff excuse me, that people had been sending, so I joined the app just so that I could follow a few specific people and watch their things. And then I hit the like Harry Potter fandom and like all these other fandoms. And I was like, wait, I can do this. Hold on. I have a phone with a camera. I have some acting ability. I can do this too. And so that's kind of been my my avenue and where my voice is at the moment. I said to my friends when I started posting about Black Lives Matter stuff, I was like, okay, now we get to play the game of how many followers am I gonna lose?
Did that happen?
Game, isn't it?
It's a fun game. Because on TikTok is the largest internet presence that I have, right? I haven't been on Facebook in months. I don't really miss it. I still am in contact with people through Messenger. But I don't really use it. It's not a platform that I was ever really that comfortable with or on that frequently. So Instagram and TikTok are kind of my main platforms. And on TikTok, I have over 4,000 followers. At the time, when I initially started this, I had about 3,000 or so. And I was like, okay, let's see how this goes. And oddly enough, after I started posting more about what was going on, showing live protester footage when I would see it come across my feed, I got more followers instead of losing them. So now I have over 4,000, which in TikTok land is not that much, but it is the largest platform that I have, because I think on Instagram right now I only have like 100 or so, which is fine. I'm not doing it to get internet famous. I'm just doing it to have an outlet for myself, because it's very, very important to me and part of who I am intrinsically. So, so that magic for me has just been focusing on the stories that I tell and how I interact with the people that I'm coming across in that app. We recently started a gay pirates tag. And so we have the Sappho's Gambit, and it's been getting a lot of traction. And the particular story that I was telling with that character and how she ended up being where she is and how she ended up being a pirate got a lot of traction. And then everything that happened, and then spreading more awareness and footage, like I said, that people were sharing, and really trying to find people who are more eloquent than me at explaining things, and showing resources for people, and just spreading the message as far and wide as possible. And in some comment boxes, tackling people who can't understand that, you know, things need to be talked about. And so I don't know, I've heard a lot of things in the Facebook realm that there have been situations, but I haven't really seen them. But for the most part, a lot of people that are in the immediate community that I've kind of cultivated around me have been very vocal, and have been sharing things and trying to educate people as well. So
Yeah.
That's been nice to not have to, you know, shoulder trying to educate people all on my own, because I don't have the spoons for that.
Yeah.
I don't.
I have a question, and it's up to you if you feel that you can answer and will or not. And I think that's a question that actually motivated this show and us to bring up this topic. We are trying to be allies. And the rule number one is you don't go around being, I'm an ally. So that's why I say we're not allies. We're trying. I'm a brown person. I share a lot of the check boxes with you, but not all of them. But our panel mates share a little bit less. So I love when you said, you know, see me for my color. It's really hard for folks to understand, like, I am Mexican. I want you to see the Mexican in front of you. And then we match the things that we match. But I want you to acknowledge who I am. So thank you for saying that. But the question is, magically, spiritually, how can we, in your opinion, of course, I know you don't speak for the whole of the community, in your opinion, how can we best hold space, hold magic, hone our gifts or abilities to help the cause, to help you, to help in the macro and the micro, globally? What would you, what top of your mind? And with that, I have to say I have to leave promptly at 5, so you all be nice to Song. And I know you're gonna open for questions. It's a shame that I'm gonna have to miss them, but Song, I would like to hear that. And with that, I say goodbye to the audience, because at 5 I'm running. But go ahead, please.
First and foremost, listen. Listen to the Black people in your communities. Listen to your Black friends. Don't expect them to shoulder the burden of educating you. You know how to read. So there are websites. I shared one in the chat in the very beginning. That website has a ton of information. It is a very, very comprehensive list of petitions that you can sign, places that you can donate. The Black Lives Matter website is on there as well. They also have a huge library of resources for people. Read. There's so many books that explain ways to help to dismantle systemic racism, how to approach and tackle white fragility, how to there's so much. There's so many people that have devoted their lives to this research, to putting these resources out there. Use them. Don't expect to have all of us hold your hand and spoon feed you the information, because there's just so much. And while I do try to make it a point to read as many of these books as I can't read them all. And honestly, for me, with my background and how I was telling you about my father, it's very hard. It's very hard to read a lot of this because it is so much of like how we've got here, right? There's Melissa H. Perry has a magnificent book that is Sister Citizen, talking about the Black female experience in this country, and where a lot of the tropes that we get of Jezebel and Mammy and all of these things, where those come from. I've stopped and started that book many times because it's just really difficult, but it is important to get through. So there are lists of books on that website as well. There's a literal Google Drive library of different books and things that you can read. There are lists of shows. Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th is on Netflix. It's a very good place to start.
Yep.
It talks about our justice system and for-profit prisons and how we've gotten to this place and what that means for people who have to go through that system. yeah, I read, look at the resources that are there, go through it. And if you want to have discussions with Black people about it, great, but please take the time to educate yourself.
Mm-hmm.
We can't do it for you. And it's not fair to ask us to when we didn't create the system. We don't benefit from the system, and we can't dismantle it by ourselves. So we need our white allies and other brown allies to step up and to not participate in this sort of oppression Olympics that seems to be cropping up more and more. Yes, everyone has struggled. Yes, everyone has had different horrific, there are so many different horrific things that we as human beings have done to each other over the years, and it sucks. However, when we are talking about systemic racism and the Black experience in this country, you just have to listen.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have
the
a
history
friend,
is there.
I have a very good friend on the Dr. Susan Harper, and she shared a phrase with me, and I want to share that phrase with everybody who is playing the Oppression Olympics. By the way, to all my fellow brown people out there, done by the hype. If you go into and you follow like a sheep this Black versus brown thing that was happening in Chicago, the only one that wins is, and I'm gonna swear, I'm sorry, the only one that wins is the fucking system. Don't buy into that. We are not into brown versus Black or who suffered more. We all have suffered. Going back to what Dr. Harper said, it's part of the curriculum, but it's not the first class. The first class that we're attending today is Black Lives Matter. And then we can go to Brown Lives Matter and Women's Lives Matter and, you know, whatever else needs to be dealt with. But I appreciate you very much, Sung, for saying all that. And man, that I will take in my heart that phrase, the Oppression Olympics. Yeah, I don't want to be on the Oppression Olympics. Thank you so much. I don't know if you read that or if you just made it up, but that,
I
man,
honestly, I cannot claim credit for that, but I cannot tell you where I got it from. I am sorry. I did not create that, but I am not sure where I heard it first.
Yeah.
But it is something that, because before I did a culling on my Facebook page, there were people that liked to come in with the Irish argument. Yes, thank you. Yeah. And so in those comments and rebuttals of things that people were saying about that, that's kind of where I got that, but I don't remember who said it first, unfortunately.
Well, I for one have to say thank you. As I said earlier, I have to go. But I know you are in more familiar and loving hands. And thank you so much, Chris, for lending me the director's
the chair. The chair. Thank you, Laura, so much. We will talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Song, before we start recording, was there anything else you would like us to know or wanted to say? And then we'll open it up for questions if people have them.
Sure. I think the only other thing, I wanted to share this quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, because people like to quote Martin Luther King in this time, but this is not one that gets quoted a lot. So I wanted to share that with you. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which in this absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is a presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who patternistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythological concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season.
Wow, that's amazing. Song, thank you so much. I cannot express the gratitude that we all have for you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to stop recording and open up to questions if anyone has any. Just give me a second.